attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Bill McHugh here, just checking in with
Bill McHugh here, just checking in with you.
The question is, are you hearing me twice?
The question is, are you hearing me twice?
Raise your hand if you're hearing me twice.
Raise your hand if you're hearing me twice.
You're hearing me twice? So hit me on the
me
chat if
twice?
you're hearing me
So
twice.
hit me on the chat if you're hearing me twice.
Otherwise, I'll keep going.
Otherwise, I'll keep going.
Seems to have fixed it. Ron, you got me there?
Seems to have fixed it. Ron, you got me there?
Yeah, I got it.
No,
So Ron, maybe you mute up.
So Ron, maybe you mute up.
Okay, Ron, are you muted? Yeah, now we're good. All right, so no echo there. What I'll do is, Ron, when you speak, I'll mute. And when I speak, you mute, okay? Perfect. All righty then. So I'm guessing people can hear me because holy cow, I've got all kinds of yes, I'm hearing you twice, and then all good now. All right, everyone, let's get rolling. So good morning from Chicago area. Bill McHugh, the Executive Director of the Firestop Contractors International Association. Joined today by Ron Guerin, FCSI. That means he's a fellow of the CSI, AIA, Certified Construction Specifier, Certified Construction Contract Administrator, Construction Document Technologist, also a member of Construction Specifications Canada, as I am. I should have put CSC after my name. And then SCIP, that acronym is the Specification Consultants in Independent Practice. Pretty cool group that's been around about, I don't know, 23, 25 years, something like that. I spoke at the first few of their conferences when CSI had their convention in Chicago for 3 years in a row. That was about 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. Ron joins us from the Phoenix area with RLGA Technical Services. His contact info is down below. Also a past chairman of the board of CSI, the Construction Specifications Institute, and also active at CSC. He attends the conferences. They have some really cool conferences up in Canada as well. Very quickly, introduction, the FCIA is the Firestop Contractors International Association. For those new to the webinars, I always ask where the fire exits are. I'm going out the door over here, around the front, grabbing all the ladies that work with me, and we're heading over to Panera Bread to get coffee if that fire alarm goes off, and then you can all do the same. A big thanks to the FCIA members for providing the opportunity for us to do these webinars, because their dues, the contractors, the manufacturers and consultants, the Firestop inspection agencies, distributors, reps, their dues is what pays for us to do what we do in the industry. Advocate for it, work at the building code development organizations, try to bring the field perspective to the standards development process, all those kinds of things. Big thanks to the board of directors from the FCIA and also the committees, because that's really where everything happens from the FCIA. The leadership over the decades, we started this association 25 years ago. I say we because I was one of the founding members, then left the industry and decided to take a role in the association management business and have been at it for the last 25 years with the FCIA. The upper left picture, yes, I took that picture. That was 2002. We met in Alexandria, Virginia, and had fun with our friend Roscoe Reeves talking about specifications at that time. And as you can see, the board has morphed over the years into a really good mix of people that have experience with the association from the start. Scott Rankin down the bottom left picture with the light colored jacket was at the very first FCIA conference 25 years ago. So a big thanks. As an association, we provide resources to our specifier friends, our code official friends, and fire marshal friends. That FCIA manual of practice lower right and the Life Safety Digest lower left available for free. Just hit us at info@fcia.org. The manual on the right, people have to pay, people meaning contractor companies and inspection agency companies pay $335 for that document. Small 1,000-page document, but if you really want to geek out on fire stopping, that's the document to do it. And I say that proudly because we've been told that there is no other document like it in the world, not anywhere around the world. And we've shown it to places from the UK to Germany to Ireland to the UAE to India to New Zealand and Australia. There's no other document like it. So again, Free Life Safety Digest. Know that the programs you're going to hear about, the FCIA developed as part of our strategic plan, believe it or not, to improve the reliability of installed fire stopping. That's what we were after. 25 years ago, probably 2% of the time a Firestop contractor was installing. And we really didn't care whether it was a specialist Firestop contractor or not. We want the stuff put in the way it's supposed to. Building code says install in accordance with the listing and the manufacturer's instructions. Get it right the first time. And the way we did that was, let's build a quality management program with the FM 4991 UL Qualified Contractor Program. Let's build special inspection standards, which we did at ASTM, working with our manufacturer partners to get that through the ASTM process, but FCIA paid to develop those standards in the first place with the consultants. Work with international accreditation services to build a quality management program for those inspection agencies. And build tools for everyone, the manual of practice, the Life Safety Digest, the free webinars, educate like crazy, get out and do things, travel the world as much as we can. Yes, it says International Association. We weren't typical obnoxious Americans and just put international in the name and never did anything. First conference in Canada, 2004. Second one, 2006, Toronto and Montreal. 2008, off to the Middle East. My trip to India took place in February 2023. Mexico City took place in 2022. Colombia took place in 2017-18. So we've been working our tail off to make sure that we're international in our scope, and we participate in code development, standards development work in other parts of the world as well. As you can see, it's really cool to have COVID kind of behind us, and it's not done obviously, but have it behind us and get out and see members again. And see our friends, the specifiers. We've been all over the place so far. The first half of the year, we got a lot more coming, especially a Canadian symposium in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, September 24 to 26. I'm speaking at the Ontario Building Officials Association conference just before that. There's a lot going on in our world, in a lot of places we got to go. Other key things, the FCIA's education program, the Firestop education program, has really had some great acceptance. During COVID, we took the Manual of Practice Chapter 3 and other chapters and built some strong presentations around them, updated the ones we had from 2013, and recorded them. Then we've taken those and tried to bring them to life with all kinds of pictures and moving action. Big thanks to Tyler Ferguson from Northeast Firestop, current National Firestop, current FCIA president, and others have helped. Tracy Smith helped with the originals, as did Ken Slamma from Southwest Firestop and also National Firestop up in Canada. And the result is a big recorded education program that you see in front of you. A lot of tools. Put your employees, doesn't matter whether you're a specifier, Firestop contractor, Firestop inspection agency. This is some really good education to get deep into our fire stopping industry. Try it. I think you'll like it. It's about systems, it's about materials. So let's get on to today's program about specs. Specifications is what they're really called, but all the rest of us call it, hey, what's in that spec? And it's spelled S-P-E-C, not S-P-E-K. It's part of the proper design, installation, inspection, and maintaining protection of fire stopping, which has been the FCIA's rally call since the foundation mission statement development in 1997-98. The DIIM covers a whole bunch of stuff. And what it's to do is make sure that the compartmentation and structural fire resistance that's installed gets installed so that it works at the end of the day when called upon by fire. We want to make sure that effective compartmentation stays a part of the total fire protection package by building that reliability. The sprinkler system, the alarm system are all common things that people know are in buildings. You look up, you see the sprinkler head, you see the alarm, you watch people go maintain them. But when you start asking people about fire resistance, you get a big blank stare from people's head. You're like, that's got to change. That's what the FCIA is about. And many of our manufacturer partners, distributor partners, inspection agency partners, contractor partners are doing their thing to educate as well, building educational tools for that. So we're going to focus today on the two pieces, the design and the maintain protection specs, codes, and standards. You know, specifications are cool, but they've got to communicate the code requirements through the construction documents, meaning specifications is one part of it, and drawings, to the contractor and the installer definitions. Contractor would be the general contractor. Installer would be the company that's installing the Firestop systems. We're going to focus on these two things. We're going to focus heavily on the specifications, though, and if we get to the fire codes at the back end and have time, we'll spend some time with that. We've got limited time, we've got an hour, but you know, we'll finish it up after an hour, but we'll take questions as we always do until the questions stop. So looking over here, making sure that I've got all the questions answered before we get started. All good there. Really appreciate having authorities, having jurisdiction on the line, having contractors on the line. I'm showing my age. Sorry, I'm thinking teleconference, telephone. But really what I'm thinking is I've got wired internet and we're all on somehow, some way. So what's the DIIM? It's the specification 078400. You'll hear from Ron a little bit later on about some of the other sections that have Firestop related information. We talk about the fire test standards. I'm not going to spend time on that. We do that all the time in other webinars. All the Firestop test standards that you see in front of you are used and specified to communicate requirements to the contractor who has to buy Firestopping from the installer. The ULC S115, the Canadian standard, ISO standards might be used, although they don't have the host stream test like we have in North America. The inspection standards, though, we see are starting to get used worldwide, specified in Canada, not mandated by building code like it is here in the International Building Code of the USA or in the NFPA 1. But there's some cool stuff going on with inspection. You know, we'd have thought 20 years ago that the inspection would have come a lot sooner, but right now we're hearing that the inspection is really starting to take off. Even though we got it in the 2012 version of the International Building Code, it took that long for it to filter its way through specifications and code adoptions to the point where jurisdictions are starting to say, yep, that's something that's normal in our code culture of the code. And of course, maintaining protection for the life cycle of the building. And specifications have to do that. So let's keep moving. You know, I'll let Ron talk a little bit, but I'll give a short introduction. Master format took a big edit 20 years ago, believe it or not. It seems like yesterday. A guy named Dennis Hall with a master format task team assembled to go from 5 digits to 6 digits and really brought a lot of interesting things to the master format list of titles and numbers. Ron, I'll let you hop in and talk a bit about that. I'll turn my microphone off so you don't get an echo, and off we'll go. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. The Construction Specifications Institute and Construction Specifications Canada jointly published the master format document. Master format, you probably have heard, is used throughout the North American area, and it's now being used in many areas across the Middle East, in South America, and in some areas of Asia. Master format is a classification system that focuses on what we call work results. And a work result is anything that includes the materials plus the labor in order to provide a finished installation or whatever the work result is. And what I like to use as an example is carpeting. Carpeting has a lot of materials. You got the carpet itself, you've got adhesive, you've got trim pieces, things like that. All of that, if the distributor brought the materials and set them on the project site, you would not have carpeting because it has not been installed yet. So the specifications include all the products and materials, accessories that go with the installation, plus the labor in order to install it to get the final work result, which is carpeting. So this master format is broken down into 50 divisions, not all of which are being used. Most of them follow if you've been in specifications for any length of time, and remember the 16 divisions before we went to the 50 division format. The first 14 divisions of the current master format follows very closely with the old master format 16 division. We'll be focusing on specifically in Division 7, which is thermal and moisture protection, which also includes fire protection for fireproofing, fire-resistive joints, and fire penetration, fire stopping for penetrations. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Bill.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate that. The cool thing is that CSI, the Construction Specifications Institute, worked with Construction Specifications Canada to really build a North American program. And it's really nice to hear, Ron, that other parts of the world have jumped on the bandwagon too. Certainly there's some firms that travel worldwide. You know, think of the big ones, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill here in Chicago, Gensler worldwide. Independent specifiers like you that work for firms, you know, thanks to the internet, you can be doing specifications for somebody in Europe or Australia or Asia, you know, and the classification system is really nice to see that communication starting worldwide, because it really lays out the format from which to drop in the technical requirements for any type of building. So really cool stuff. Very quickly, talking about fire stopping specifications, you know, this passage that you see in front of you is something you might see from many specifiers. And really the specifier, if I could digress just for a second, the profile of the specifier is really kind of special if you ask me. There really aren't many professional people that can debate any industry quite detailed with anybody in a healthy way, no arguing, just debate it for industry development so that we all get better. There's really hardly anyone in the construction industry that can do that. You know, building code officials would probably be the other entity, probably the fire marshals, that can discuss every discipline. If you think about it, the contracting world, you know, other than the general contractor who should be able to do that, you know, the subcontracting world is very focused on its particular section of specifications. So looking at fire stopping specifications, look at the charging language that would be in the scope part of the document. It talks about providing fire stop systems. Now, if we define systems, I'm going to say that's the listing or engineering judgment and or equivalent fire resistance rated assembly consisting of a material, combination of materials installed to retain the integrity, in other words, protect the fire resistance rating of the assembly by maintaining an effective barrier against the spread of flame, smoke, water movement. So as soon as those words, and I've highlighted in yellow, flame, smoke, water movement, even though it might not be a smoke barrier, if we're in fire stopping, because it's asking for smoke resistance and fire resistance at the same time, at the receiving end, if I were the contractor, and I'm not, I'm an association person, technical person, I'd say I'm looking for an L-rated fire stop because it asks for flame and smoke both. If it's asking for water, remember the fire stopping has a W rating, a water resistance rating. I'm going to be looking for a W rating as well. And then look at this. Movement is also in the charging language. ASTM E3037, relatively new standard, been out for 5 years now. The manufacturers are just starting to test it to give a quantified level of movement. So one thing that you might do if you're a Firestop contractor is if you see this kind of charging language, an RFI could go back up and say, okay, you know, how much water resistance are you looking for? 3-foot head of water, 10, 20, 30? You know, fire stopping, think about it in walls. Are we going to get 20 head feet of water at a wall? Probably not. Are we going to get that kind of head foot of water in a horizontal assembly? Probably not, especially on a floor that's got elevators. That water's not going to hit that high. But maybe make sure that the specifier and or design professional is telling you exactly what they want. How much movement is expected? You know, most of people are thinking about movement at the head of wall assembly, expansion joints, perimeter fire containment areas. But guess what? Penetrating items, if the floor above that is supporting piping that's going through a horizontal assembly, if that floor moves, that penetrating item is moving. And if the floor below stays static, guess what? We've got movement there too. So, you know, this is pretty short stuff. And you look at it, you go, okay, sure, I've got it. You know, pretty crazy. Looks normal. But it's got a lot of things in here that would start asking questions. And then it tells us where these penetrations are going to take place. Blank openings, penetrations, construction joints, building perimeter gap, in other words, where the perimeter fire protection would go. And then even fire resistance rated to non-rated barriers. ASTM E2837, guess what? Head of wall to a non-rated roof assembly. It's all laid out in this one section, the purpose, the scope. Ron, any thoughts on this section before I keep flying? All good. Okay, moving forward. Okay, so looking forward, looking to the next section, think about, you know, non-rated assemblies. What are we doing there? Well, this one's not really talking about non-rated assemblies. It's talking about penetrations and joints in fire resistance rated assemblies, and then where it meets non-rated assemblies, not non-rated assemblies itself. But then again, you know, think about some of the things that might be in there too. You know, smoke and water. In some specifications, it might just say, be sure to protect against those elements that might come in contact with the fire stop system during the use of the building. Uh-oh, what's the definition of that? Good question. That big backup and RFI. Are we looking for chemical, biological, radiation resistance? What kind of chemicals? To what standards are we going to base these? Make sure in your proposals as a contractor that you're looking for those resistances. That scope covers what you do. Some of that's in the product data sheets from the manufacturers. Also watch out when you come back to this section where it talks about protecting against fire resistance and penetrations. A lot of the scopes will say seal. And you're like, okay, seal. Seal against what? Water, chemicals, fire, smoke, what? Sealing is really a very broad word and ought to be used very carefully on the specification world. Really, what we've been asking the fire marshals to do when they walk in an existing building is say to people, protect that penetration, the breach around the fire resistance, in the fire resistance rated assembly, protect that breach with a fire stop system. And people go, what? You know, when you say seal, guess what you're going to get? Well, gypsum wallboard compound, sealant, latex sealant. Yeah, it looks like it'll protect against fire. It's got a little UL label on it and all that kind of stuff. Communication is a huge thing, and communicating with the correct words that say protect against fire spread, temperature resistance, air leakage / smoke, water resistance, M for movement, exposure to various chemicals, etc. That's ASTM E2750, a standard that was developed probably 15 years ago that covers salt spray and some temperature differentials, not everything, but really specifications really need to communicate clearly what the resistances are that these Firestop systems are to resist, in addition to the basic fire temperature, air leakage, movement, water, then chemical, biological radiation resistance. Moving on. Ron, this is where we start jumping into the numbering system. So if you want to jump in here and talk about the numbers that you would find in master format for fireproofing, have at it, or fire stopping, have at it.
Okay, primarily what you'll find is in section 078400, which is your fire protection section, and there'll be a lot of, this is what we call a level 2 number, 0784. The first two pairs are the first pair is the level 1, second pair is level 2, and third pair is level 3. Sometimes you'll see a level 4, which is separated by a decimal point. But in 0784, that's where you find all your fire protection requirements, all your penetrations, joint conditions, and perimeter fire containment, where you've got conditions of joints between curtain wall assemblies and a floor assembly that comes in. You got to feel that gap that's between the curtain wall that allows that curtain wall to flex back and forth, but still maintain the seal between the individual floor levels. The focus here is one discipline. I have seen on numerous occasions where mechanical, electrical, plumbing specifications would include in their general requirements areas of their specifications the specification, or what they consider a specification for fire stopping of their particular elements. We want to avoid that as much as possible. You want the fire protection to be done by one individual, usually by the architect, since the architect, and it's involving all the architectural elements, floor systems, wall systems, curtain wall systems. So you want the architect to be the one discipline that manages all of that. Let the electrical and plumbing and mechanical engineers deal with their system specifically, and for mechanical engineers, they'll deal with the fire dampers, but the seals and the joints around any penetrating items should be addressed in Division 07 in this particular level 2 category. And also what you want to do is specify that it's all done by one installer as well. To have it done by multiple installers, like the mechanical contractor come in and they putty their joints, and the electrical contractor comes in and putty their joints, you're going to get a variety of quality in the installations and probably none of it good. So you want to have a good qualified installer, which we'll talk about later on. So I'll turn it back to you, Bill.
Let's let you cover some of the other more detailed, looks like level 3 specifications. Go ahead.
So this gets into the list of potential sections that you'll see in Division 07 under the 078400 level 2 number. 078413 gets into penetration fire stopping. This is probably the section that you see most, although it does have those level 4 numbers down below. You may see some of these sections specifically if the specifier wants to get that detailed, but generally you don't have enough of those to warrant a individual section for these types of installations, and everything is usually specified in the 078413. 078443 gets specifically into joint fire stopping. Those are the joints between wall to wall, head of wall, bottom of wall, floor to floor. And again, this gets into the specific requirements. that focus primarily on fire stopping. And as we'll get into a little bit later, there are some joints out there that are focused more on movement, with fire being somewhat of a secondary consideration, even though it is primary, it's a requirement. So you may find some expansion joint assemblies here. You may find some preformed joint assemblies here, just because they are fire stopping joints. But you may find those in other sections, as I'll point out later when we get to that area, where the focus is more on the movement, because now here you've got building joints that are moving back and forth for considerable distances, 1-2 inches of movement, even larger in seismic areas. So there the focus is more on the movement. However, if the assembly is fire resistance rated, you'll find some fire resistive requirements in those particular sections. 078453 gets into your perimeter fire stopping, as I mentioned before, between the curtain wall and edge of slab. And then 078600 gets specifically into smoke sealing. So around the door perimeters, window perimeters, anything that is like for a smoke partition that is only required to be smoke resistant and not have any fire resistance requirements, you can specify those smoke seals in these areas. Perimeter of openings and annular spaces. The specifications will probably get into fills and things like that for non-fire resistive assemblies. And so you may be required to fill the gaps of that annular space. If you're not familiar what an annular space is, it's the opening that's left between the construction and the penetrating item itself. And that needs to be filled, especially on floor assemblies, whether the floor assembly is rated or not. And so you may have a requirement here for a smoke seal and a non-rated floor assembly to seal those annular spaces. And on that last bullet there, I just want to point out that the building code does reference openings quite frequently. However, it never defines what an opening is. And the best determination or the best definition I can give you for what an opening is anything that is a path of least resistance through a fire rated assembly. So if you got a penetration, a door, a window, a joint, anything that goes through a fire rated assembly, that could be a weak spot in that assembly, and that would fall under the definition of an opening. With that, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. That's kind of interesting. You know, you talk about the definitions there. In addition to opening, which is heavily used in the door and glazing industry, you know, they talk about their world as openings. So we've been introducing into standards, the UL 1479 and ULC S115, the term breach of the fire resistance rated assembly to try to, you know, take us one level back. And everyone talks about, well, we're penetrations. Okay, good. Well, there's a penetrating item that passes through a breach in that fire resistance rated assembly, and then the Firestop system protects that breach. And we've been trying to work with the door industry and the glazing industry to talk about the fact that their assemblies protect the breach, a big one, in that fire resistance rated assembly, because they call themselves the openings industry in a lot of ways. Kind of interesting how terminology works depending on where you are and what level you're, whether you're contracting or at the specifier level, general contractor, and understanding the definitions really is a big deal when you think about it in industry. Moving forward, a couple other places where fire stopping might be found. Ron, feel free to hop in and talk a little bit about these, whatever you want to do there.
Sure. This is where I was mentioning that you may find fire resistive assemblies in areas other than in that specific 078400 level. For example, concrete expansion and contraction joints, 03-1500 will address specific joints within the concrete assembly, whether that's a slab on grade, which really isn't going to be an issue for fire resistance, but in an elevated slab or vertical construction walls, you'll have expansion and contraction joints in those as well, and those can be breaches to a rated assembly or to a rated structural frame if it's a column or beam. One that you'll probably find quite frequently is 077129, which is a roof expansion joint, which carries on if you're isolating one segment of the building from another segment of the building for movement capabilities, primarily for wind sway and for seismic, and in some cases thermal as well. You may have a roof expansion in order to complete the full isolation of that building segment from the other building segments. That roof expansion joint may be required to be fire resistance rated. It typically is not, as long as the joint itself is protected so that the roof assembly is not exposed. If you've got fire protection, fire rated assembly that goes all the way up through the joint itself, and all you're doing is just capping off the joint with a water sealant expansion joint, then that does not need to be rated. 0784-43 we talked about for fire resistant joint sealants. That's where you'll see all the joint fire stopping requirements. And then 079100 and 079200 get into just plain joint sealants. But sometimes somebody not knowing that 0784 is out there may specify a fire resistive joint in 0791 or 079200 areas. The 079100 for preformed joints is, if I can use a manufacturer's name here, M-Seal is probably one that's probably pretty well known. It's basically a foam seal that's compressed with a silicone facer on one or both sides of it, with adhesive surfacing on the two major concealed sides, and they just slip it in the joint and release the expansion, and it seals against the two opposing wall construction or floor construction. Sometimes these will also provide dual duty as a fire resistive joint as well. And then 079200 is your standard joint sealants for silicone, urethanes, latex, butyl joints. But you may find some fire resistor joints in here. Hopefully the specifier, if they are skilled at what they do, will not do the error and specify a fire resistor joint in this particular section. But if you don't see anything in 078400 and you know there's fire resistive construction in there, you may want to take a look at 0792 to see if the content is specified there.
Fair enough there, Ron. One thing that we wanted to jump into, and leave your microphone on and we can kind of talk about it together, is the ability that the specification has to speak to the building owner and set up the maintaining protection recipes, if you will, for all passive fire resistance. Sprinkler industry, alarm industry has done a really nice job in the building code, the fire codes, with long, detailed sections about how to maintain protection of sprinkler, using sprinkler systems and alarm systems in existing buildings. The fire resistance industry, until the 2018 version of the International Fire Code, had a paragraph about that big, a little tiny thing that said just maintain the protection without much there. Our friend Rich Walke spent the better part of 8 or 9 months, and then of course 2 code hearings, initial committee action, and then of course the public comment hearings at ICC, working on the fire code, breaking it into discipline. You might want to turn your mic off there just for a second, Ron, because I'm getting the feedback again, sorry. Anyway, what we did was broke the passive fire protections area in the fire code into separate sections. And those separate sections would be fire stopping, structural fire resistance, fire dampers, fire rated doors, fire rated glazing, to be able to cover each individual section. They're relatively small now, but look over the next several years as each industry adds important information about their particular discipline for maintaining protection of existing buildings. One of the things that was added was this concept of an inventory of fire resistance. This came from the healthcare industry, actually. When we were at the building code development hearings, at first we said, give us listings and manufacturer's instructions and drawings, life safety drawings. And life safety drawings brought objections from the code officials. So we came back with the word inventory of fire resistance. What was that? That's the life safety drawings plus the manufacturer's installation instructions and maintaining protection instructions in the maintenance of those materials, if there is any required. And the third thing is the listing and engineering judgment of those assemblies. And that's where the inventory was built. Shortly after that 2018 code development process took place, actually in 18, I was at the Construction Specifications Institute conference speaking on this particular subject. And I had a whole bunch of different sections in Division 1 laid out, of which Dennis Hall, who was the master format task team leader in 2000 to bring on that 6-digit master format, I said, hey, Dennis, is this the right place to put the inventory? In other words, the requirement that the general contractor is to gather this information and then get it to the building owner. He said, yeah, 017839. Go ahead, Ron, you got some comments on this particular section, actually more about how Division 1 works?
Yeah, Divisions 1 is the general requirements that applies to every section within the project manual. So this Division 01 typically includes all the requirements for the contractor. It includes the summary. It includes payment requirements, submittal requirements, substitution requirements, all through the execution, temporary facilities, controls, and things like that. And then at the end, it has all the closeout requirements for the completing the project. And specifically, section 017839 gets into project record documents. So these are including all the record drawings. A lot of people refer to them as built. So we try to avoid that term because it's not really as built, because all the information is provided third hand primarily. Record specifications, record product data, and any other documents that are required to be turned over to the owner as a record of the construction. And this inventory is considered a record document. The owner needs to have this inventory of all their systems. So even though it may be specified in multiple sections within the project manual, each of those sections should probably refer back to this section specifically for consideration of identifying the inventory to make sure that those items are then turned over to the contractor, which in turn will then compile all the inventory requirements and then turn those over to the owner as a record document at the completion of the project.
Cool stuff. Really appreciate that, Ron. And really, this section's hugely important to make sure it's right. It doesn't just cover fire stopping either. I mean, this is everything: fire dampers, fire doors, fire rated glazing, on and on. The whole building, actually. This is not just our stuff. This is a little bit of everything, but we really need to reference from the Firestop section. I mean, 017839's got to be talking up to the Firestop section to make sure that we get what we want, so the building owner and manager has the documents so they can maintain protection. We always hear from building owners, well, I don't have any documentation. This initiative is to try to build that documentation so that it's there. And because it's in the fire code, let's say the building owner manager loses this information, the fire marshal can walk in and say, I need to see your project record documents, your inventory of fire resistance, which we're going to call project record documents for now. Building owner says, well, I haven't had those for decades. The fire marshal can say to the building owner, well, then you need to go build those and back into it somehow. That could be an amazing discussion between the building owner and manager and the fire marshal. But technically, they can do that. And so, if you've got building owner clients, contractors that are on the horn here or on the line and on the webinar, advise them now that this is the type of detail that they should have in their quote records someplace to be able to maintain protection of their existing buildings. And if they don't have it, and there's some kind of a fire or a disaster, loss of life and property, the expert witnesses, the first place they're going to go is the fire code and look at it and say, okay, did you have an inventory? Nope, didn't have that. Well, if you didn't have an inventory, how'd you know how to maintain this stuff? And the building owner manager on the stand at the court of law is just going to fumble his way through or her way through. It won't be pretty, let's put it that way. So think about that. Some of the references that we see in specifications include several things, and then Ron, you can jump in at any time and talk about them, but we're seeing more specifications call for labeling each individual Firestop assembly. Not required by building code, but seems to be a best practice, and we're seeing more requirements for it. The FCIA has a recommended professional practice for labeling Firestop assemblies. Tells what that label should have on it, the information, where it should be located, all that kind of thing. We're working at ASTM to build a consensus standard. It will be published by ASTM. Not done yet. Might take us a while. Hopefully have it done before the end of the year, but just not sure. But it's something that we see. Again, Ron, cut in on any time when you want to talk.
I'm seeing more and more of this. The standard specification suites out there, master spec, spec link, all include the labeling requirements in their standard specification sections. And as Bill mentioned, that it is not a code requirement, but it would help with the inventory. A lot of people are kind of going to the QR code or the barcode so they can easily scan and get the data quickly without having to, a lot of these handwritten ones, the ink can disappear over time. So the codes will help maintain that in an electronic database. So it's a process that is growing in popularity. And I would say more of your, most of your sophisticated installers, or not installers, but building owners, such as in the hospital, medical care areas, are doing this because it's just that much easier. They've got so much of it in their buildings that it's really hard to maintain unless they have this kind of inventory.
Yeah, they are pretty cool. In fact, I've always described them when I go to the building code development hearings and talk about it. I always say, remember the poster you saw that said, don't fight the alligators, drain the swamp. You got all these penetrating items and systems, and we have no idea which one they are. So after they're installed, the Firestop inspection agency's got to go figure it out. The building owner's got to figure out what system was there. Using the label tends to drain the swamp of the problems that come from trying to find those systems and communicates what's there for the life cycle of the building, regardless of who owns it. Other things that you find in specifications references the FM standards. There's two of them. There's an FM 4990, not specified much. Most of the time, the penetration Firestop standards, the UL 1479, ASTM E 814 for penetrations. But there is a standard from FM, a little bit different than the UL standard, that gets specified typically when there's a FM insured building and they want all FM standards used, or as many as possible. Now, the other thing that comes is the FM 4991 standard for the approval of Firestop contractors. You'll find this also in Master Spec and Spec Link and other master specification programs. The IAS accreditation program for inspection agencies, special inspection agencies, covers just about everything you can think of. There's IAS AC 291 accredited welding inspection, masonry inspection, Firestop inspection, fireproofing inspection. Not specified as widely yet, but look for that as a trend in the future. International Firestop Council, their guidelines for using engineering judgments get specified widely. The NFPA 101 5000 International Building Code, Fire Code, the UL standards, the UL 1479 for penetrations, 2079 for joints, the Qualified Firestop Contractor Program, all get specified. I put in here the FM exam and the UL Firestop exam. The International Firestop Council has an exam too that winds up in specifications for special inspection agency individual inspector qualifications from time to time, depending on the specification. And then, of course, you know, find those systems in the directories, UL, Intertech, FM approvals, other places as well. Engineering judgments, you know, we've talked about this forever with at various webinars that we've done from the FCIA and others too. That covers when you can't find a system in the UL directory, FM directory, Intertech directory that matches the conditions in the field. So therefore, we're looking for an engineering judgment or equivalent fire resistance rated assembly. How do we prevent using those? You know, some specifiers will say, well, let's put a representative sheet on the drawings. And maybe at this point, spend a couple of minutes, Ron, talking about the drawings and how they work together with the specifications to communicate what the requirements might look like.
Yeah, drawings, as you know, is one half of your contract documents. So you got the drawings and specifications, and they're supposed to work together. The drawings that typically identify where things go, the quantities and things like that, but it does not address the qualitative requirements. And the qualitative requirements are specified in the project manual in the specifications. In most cases where a jurisdiction requires the reproduction of the actual fire stopping systems, a lot of architects will reproduce the UL assembly on drawing sheets in the drawings, which are very proprietary. In other words, they have specific manufacturers identified with those assemblies. If you're dealing with an owner that is required to be or is a public entity that requires open competition, specifying a single product or a single manufacturer is generally frowned upon, so you have to provide alternative manufacturers. So now we have these drawings that show one type of assembly, and there's no need to go into and place in the same assembly for every type of manufacturer out there that you want to specify. So what you do is you identify on the drawings the one assembly, use that as what we call the basis of design, in which the specifications will say the basis of design is this manufacturer and product. However, the other acceptable manufacturers can be whatever is listed below. And through the submittal process, which will be outlined in part 1 of the specification, would be a list of all those assemblies that the contractor proposes to use for the project, which may be above and beyond what's actually even shown on the drawings, because sometimes the drawings don't show every possible penetration that may occur on the drawings. So the specifications and the drawings need to be coordinated. The specifications need, if the drawings do show the assembly, the specification should specify what is shown on the drawings and then provide alternatives if alternatives are required.
Cool stuff. While we're there, Ron, I skipped over and got to the part one. If you want to spend a couple of minutes explaining about the three-part sections.
Yeah, so a typical specification section will be outlined in what we call section format, which is a CSI, CSE document as well. It has three parts. Part one is the general, part two is products, and part three is execution. Part one has all the administrative requirements, and if you look at the structure of part one, it kind of models the same structure that Division 01 is in. So part one, we'll start off with the summary and go through some of the basic requirements, gets down into what the submittal requirements are, what the qualification requirements are, which I hope we have time to hear to get into, and some of the conditions that need to be present before work can install. Then part two gets into the actual products themselves, and the products will list all the what are the acceptable materials. In this case, you don't have fabrication requirements. And then in part three, we'll get into the actual installation. And so that's the actual execution. In part one, where I mentioned the qualifications, because I'm seeing special inspection here, there are two types of qualifications that may be in the specifications itself. One would be the installer, and the installer may be required to be certified or accredited, either through one of these associations. Sometimes the manufacturer of the product may require the accreditation or the certification. And then there's also requirements for special inspectors. Special inspections are required under certain conditions for Firestop and fire-resistive joints. The special inspections typically are conducted by the owner. So in most specification sections, if you do have special inspections, the requirements may not be in there because the owner is handling it separately from the construction contract. However, the contractor needs to know that the project is subject to special inspection. So that requirement would be in there, but there would be no need to identify specifically what the qualifications are for the inspector, because the contractor is not hiring the special inspector. In those rare occasions where the owner is the contractor and you put in this, and the owner will be hiring the special inspector, you can put in the qualification requirements for the special inspector in that part one area. Anything else there, Bill?
No, I think we're all good there. Getting back into the existing buildings, if you will, and we got a whole bunch of questions that are coming in. We'll wrap things up here in the next couple of minutes, coming right up on top of the hour. That way we've delivered the content and we can roll on with questions as long as we want to go. But really, that project record documents, a lot of people are thinking about existing buildings. It seems like the specifiers have been working like crazy over the last 20 years, in my opinion, to make sure they communicate really clearly. I mean, to hear you talk about our section and the requirements that you typically see, and talk about, have other specifiers be able to explain clearly what the requirements are. That didn't exist 25 years ago. There were questions left and right, and now it's much more common throughout the industry to have clear communications. The building owner is the next, call it final frontier, if you will, kind of like Star Trek, the final frontier, space. What's going on in their space and maintaining the protection for the life cycle of the building. Because once it's handed over from the general contractor, the Firestop contractor, all is good. Give it a week or two and people are doing things in buildings. Buildings are living things, not life, if you will, but they live, and people move things around, add new penetrating items, new services through buildings, and do things. And what we have to figure out is, A, let's maintain the documentation that was created during new construction, and B, make sure that the protection that was there maintains throughout the life cycle of the building. And that project record document is a big deal to do that. In that project record document will be the manufacturer's installation instructions, and I know that many of the manufacturers have been spending time adding what to do on those product data sheets and installation instructions and safety data sheets, what to do for repairing those assemblies. For instance, if there's a movement joint, we have to take out the whole Firestop sealant, if it was a sealant, in order to maintain the movement properties. Certainly the patching would work for fire and for smoke, but what about for movement? What about for water resistance? What are the specific repairs required by that? We're seeing the manufacturers spend a lot of time communicating those requirements for patching to maintain the protection, maintain the adhesion of sealant to sealant, and whatever else needs to be there. The manufacturer is the organization to recommend that, and that's critical because the manufacturer knows the chemistry of those products. It's not something we like, generally we do this. It's very specific, especially when we get into MESM products and any of the sealants as well. So back to that project record document, big deal, important to have. So let's do this. We got a whole bunch of questions that get in here that have been asked. Let's fast forward our way. We had another program on fire codes that we talked about before, and go back in our archives, take a look at it. We'll do another one probably later in the year on fire codes, but we're on specifications today, and let's get over and start covering the questions. Here's the first question that came in, and it says, I know this might be off subject, but my team and I, owner representative at a hospital, came up with an issue on a smoke barrier wall, not a smoke partition. And it says not fire rated, just smoke. So we've got all kinds of issues going on here definition wise, because a smoke barrier is a defined term in the building code, so is a smoke partition. And the question is, if I have one layer of 5/8 inch gypsum panel, is that sufficient enough to pass as a smoke barrier for the AHJ inspector and or fire marshal? I'll let you have some fun with this one if you want, Ron, and I'll jump in at any time. Go for it.
Well, if it's actually a smoke barrier, it's required to have a 1 hour fire resistance rating, and the assembly itself should be comply with that. If you've got 5/8 inch Type X gypsum board taped and finished on both sides, then you essentially have a 1 hour assembly that generally conforms to U419. And so you essentially got a smoke barrier there. The concern with the smoke barrier is not necessarily through the panel itself, but around the perimeter of the wall itself where it intersects other construction and those penetrating items and doorways and windows that may be present in that wall itself. All those have to meet the leakage requirements for the smoke barrier. And so the wall itself is probably the least of your concern. It's all those joints, penetrations, and openings that go through that wall is what you need to be focused on.
Absolutely. And in addition, there'll be specific requirements for each discipline. Doors might have some requirements for positive pressure. Fire dampers, if it's fire resistance rated, we're at a fire damper and smoke, so it'd be both. You tested in accordance with UL 555S. And then we're also looking at Firestop systems with an L rating, the air leakage rating. That's right out of the building code. The Chapter 7, the International Building Code, talks about smoke barriers and tells what to do with fire stopping as it goes through, just as Ron had mentioned, and that's joints and penetrations. It gives a minimum number to meet as far as the air leakage for each individual penetration, then cumulatively per 100 square foot of wall area. Very specific in the building code. So our advice back to you, the question asker, is get a definition from the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. Is it a smoke partition, which would be a 0 hourly rated assembly, only requires protecting the perimeter, as Ron said, and the penetrations against smoke spread, or is it a smoke barrier, which, as Ron mentioned, 1 hour fire resistance rated assembly, protected with air leakage rated assemblies and fire resistance rating? Good question. Another comment came in about openings are confusing. The code defines opening protective in a context of fire doors and fire windows. In section 716, opening protectives relate to those assemblies. And then penetrations and joints, that was our openings discussion, are defined elsewhere. Another comment came in, a section worthy of mentioning is section 070553, which is fire and smoke assembly identification. It's always disheartening to look above a ceiling and not be able to tell what the assembly fire rating is supposed to be. I can tell you that in the 2008-9 cycle, no, 9-10 cycle for the 12 building code, it might have been one or the other, it might have been for the 12 or the 15, I'm not sure which, but there was even further back a requirement added to the International Building Code, Chapter 7, to identify the barrier. It doesn't necessarily identify it by term, defined term. It just says fire and smoke rated assembly, protect all openings. NFPA 101 and NFPA 5000, I believe in the 2018 version, then said identify the barrier by the term that it actually is. Smoke barrier, smoke partition, fire wall, which really makes a ton of sense. I don't know what the 0553 does, Ron. Do you know much about that section?
I don't see it used much at all. I do write my specifications to label fire resistive assemblies, and I do it by the type of assembly. I do a lot of work with the Mayo Hospital here in the Phoenix area, and they do require that type of labeling. However, they prefer it in not in the Division 07, but in the Division 09 painting section, because it's basically a spray painting label using templates, and they just spray paint it at a certain letter height. I think it's the requirement is 2 inches, and spaced every so often down the length of the wall. And so that's where I've generally seen it, but I like this number. You can put it there. Generally what I try to do is not to create work for me by adding a section that only addresses a small element of work. I'll work it into something else. And what I have done in the past is wherever I have joint assemblies or penetrations, I'll put the markings in those sections, and you can also even put it in the gypsum board assembly areas as well if you want to install it there. But I prefer to kind of work it into another section. It seems logical, but you can use that section number.
Yeah, very true. That section number, or at least the International Building Code language, does specify the size of the letters. I think it's 3 inches by 3/8.
3 inches, yeah.
Yeah. But regardless, here what it results in is the size of the label is as wide as my hands are, 6 feet. If you use the stroke width and the height, so the height's probably about this high, and the stroke is that. By the time you write fire rated barrier, it's almost 6 feet wide, and it's spaced every, I think, 50 feet. So 25 to 30 feet from each wall over there. And then every 50 feet in between is where that's supposed to be. I really like what NFPA did, which is to say, mark it as the wall is defined, because that really communicates what the maintaining protection is. You know, are we going to use an L-rated Firestop, or are we going to use, you know, what are we going to use? So it's a good practice, in my opinion, to use the defined term, whether it's in Division 7 or elsewhere, up to the specifier. There might be some efficiencies if the Firestop contractor is already labeling all those penetrations they're already up at the wall. They can just simply add that. I've seen stickers, I've seen stencils from Firestop contractors that do barrier maintenance programs that do that kind of work. Good questions. Next question was, let's see, how do you address old Firestops? That's a good question. Let's say we're in an existing building and we're trying to identify whether the fire stops that have been installed 20 years ago comply with requirements at the time of permit. Is basically what we're looking at. The FCIA put together a recommended professional practice for survey of existing buildings. The survey is not an inspection like it's ASTM E21742393. It's simply a visual survey where the surveyor would look up at the penetrating items, take a guess at what system it might be. Metal penetrating items would be in the WL1000 series because that's what the gypsum panel assemblies would likely be. And then if we look at the color of the Firestop products that are used, we can kind of get generally what manufacturer it was or find some record documents that might tell us which one, and then start narrowing down to the systems. The Firestop contractor, won't cut into it to see what the thicknesses are, but they'll look up and visually compare what exists in the field to the listing and the manufacturer's instructions and say it seems to comply or it seems not to comply. And that might set up a scope of work for the building owner manager to use to retrofit what's there to make sure it's properly protected. They can then budget, as the Firestop contractor or Firestop inspection agency is doing a survey, they can then at the same time assemble a proposal of some kind or generate a scope of work from the inspection agency perspective. Contractor could do a proposal and scope of work and then communicate to the building owner, here's about a budget of what you might think of for the next several years to return the fire resistance rating and document what's there on the wall and in a electronic program, paper program, whatever, spreadsheet, whatever they want to call it. So that might be the answer for that one. Next question is there a significant difference between the caulking used in a UL listed assembly for joints and a sealant used in a UL listed assembly for a penetration? So good question. Sometimes in UL listed assemblies or Intertech or FM approvals, you'll see the same Firestop sealant specified in those listings in a penetration and a joint, same one. What really comes down to is the movement capability that's been tested and listed for that Firestop sealant used in a Firestop system in either a penetration or a joint assembly. The tested and listed system will say the joint movement capabilities of that Firestop product. The product data sheets and the listing will then say water resistance or movement resistance, air leakage rating for smoke, and then the manufacturer will have to tell the Firestop contractor, specifier, and everyone else what chemicals is it resistant to, if there's cleaning chemicals around, hydraulic fluid if it's in a mechanical room, air conditioning fluids that might leak onto the Firestop systems, or if there's sleeves that stick up to inches above the floor, maybe it's not an issue, but that's all from the manufacturer as well. Any thoughts there, Ron, or did I kind of catch it from your perspective?
I think you got it all.
Good stuff. Let's see, identification and markings. Section 7037 for the International Building Code. NFPA 2019 would be in Chapter 8, 8.2.2.5. And cool thing is I was there for both debates at the International Building Code, and I serve on the NFPA Fire Protection Features Committee. The guy that brought that forward, the person that brought that forward was Howard Hopper from UL, who decided to bring the properties of the barrier, if you will, and put that into the NFPA. Next question, I come up across half-hour fire resistance rated gypsum assembly designs quite often. Am I correct in understanding that the half-hour listed systems don't exist? That's a true statement. I don't know of any. And Ron, you can kick in if you know any.
Yeah, there are some half-hour assemblies now. They're few and far between. In my opinion, if you're designing a commercial building, it's usually found in fire partitions is where you can get the half-hour or 30-minute assemblies permitted, and in some cases corridor walls in commercial applications. When you do have that, if you're constructing the rest of the building with 5/8 inch Type X gypsum board on metal studs or wood studs, you're building a 1 hour wall anyways. The wall assembly itself is probably the least of your issues. Firestop penetrations in the joints, again, I don't think there are any that I have come across that are designed just for 30 minutes. So the 30-minute assembly, it gives you some flexibility, but I default automatically to a 1 hour assembly anyways. And
Yeah,
it just makes much more sense, and is actually probably even more economical for the contractor to provide all the same construction rather than trying to parse out the 30-minute walls from the 1 hour walls.
Yeah, very fair. And the time temperature curve is the same, whether it's a 30-minute assembly or a 1 hour assembly, 0 to 1,000 degrees in 5 minutes. And then that time temperature curve levels out probably at about 15, 20, 30 minutes, if even that. And then it goes on for that next 1 hour or 2 hours. And it's minuscule, the amount of temperature increase after that first 15 minutes. So really, that 1 hour assembly will provide great protection. Is it way too much overkill? Don't think so. I mean, the manufacturers have optimized their products to get the least amount of material to the highest amount of fire resistance rating. And I think the toughest time is actually that first 15 minutes, frankly, where the intumescent materials are doing their expansion, they're locking into place, forming the insulating char for that period of time. And it really is the first thermal shock, 0 to 1,000 in 5 minutes. It's really driving that material bonkers and testing it quickly. So I tend to agree with you there as well. I think that's the last question actually that came in. I'm looking up at the chat box, not seeing anything there. Looking over at the question box, and it looks like we caught everything there. So I'll put out to the audience, questions going once, questions going twice, questions going 3 times, 3.5, 4. I think we got them all, Ron. So
Okay, great.
On behalf of the FCIA, a big thanks to you, Ron, for taking some time to be with us. Any closing comments from you before we sign off?
No, just if you write specs and you want to learn more about specification writing, I strongly encourage you to look into CSI and specifically the Construction Specifications Practice Guide. And we do have a certification for specifiers called the CCS, Certified Construction Specifier Program. And I encourage you to seek out those accreditations and get more involved in writing specifications and the specification industry.
And from the industry perspective, I've been a member of CSI, let's see, all but 6 months of my career. And I can tell you that the industry discussions that I've been able to have starting in the early 80s, frankly, with my specifier friends, has been worth its weight in gold. Learning about technical material, categorizing where stuff goes. It's been a great career and a great opportunity to be involved at CSI and have those industry discussions at a high level. Frankly, when we as FCIA built the FM program, talked about special inspection, the first place I presented any of these programs that you saw in front of you, the FM 4991, the UL qualified contractors, ASTM 2174-2393, and then maintaining protection. First place was at the 2000 CSI National Convention. And I basically looked at the specifiers and said, look, you're our board of directors. Because if you guys think we're nuts, we're not going to go anywhere with the plan that we have. And they told us that we were on target with the way that we could improve our industry's delivery to the building owner and manager as a group. And really appreciated the feedback we've gotten from both CSI and then also our friends in Canada, CSC. They have a little different designation, similar but different. They call it a registered specification writer, RSW. To the industry people, it's a great place to be and a great way to learn about our industry from a little different perspective. So again, thanks, Ron. Appreciate you hopping in. And again, thank you to the audience. Thank you for participating and being part of this webinar and all the webinars we do. Free resources, again, at fcia.org, info at fcia.org. If you want to communicate with me, my email address is there. And we'll be signing off for this one and look forward to being with you in July for our next webinar. If Lindsay hasn't already posted it, it'll be up there here shortly. I think she probably already has. Don't ask me what it is because I won't know for a couple more weeks. I can't keep all that stuff straight in my head. I can't bring groceries home unless I have that sticky note posted to my face. All right, everyone, have a great week, and we'll look forward to talking soon. The FCI level 3 is probably going to be introduced in the next 2 months, so keep an eye out for it. Thanks, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks again, Ron. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.